Hey there. So this little video, brief as it's going to be, is giving you a bit more insight into the suits. Now, we talked in the introduction about the major arcana and the minor arcana and how everybody loves the major because the cards are provocative, the images are big and bold, and they're archetypes. They tell us so much. We all want to see those in our readings. We did mention that maybe the minor arcana doesn't get quite such a fair shake. People don't love it so much. As I mentioned, you get justice in your spread, and it's, ooh, you get a 5 of wands. Maybe the people you're reading for aren't quite so enthusiastic about that. But here's why they're important. They add depth to your reading. They can tell you an awful lot. If somebody's asking, for example, about timing, getting a minor arcana card, analyzing the card itself, looking at the suit, is going to tell you a lot more than the tower will. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a way of using the major arcana for timings. That'll be another video. But for the purposes of this video and looking at the suits are great indicators of timing. They'll also tell you an awful lot that will add far more depth to your readings. So let's get started. What do we mean by suits? We mean the 4 categories. So let's have a look. I have a Rider-Waite. We talked about the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Let's start with swords. Just to give you an illustration, I picked up the aces. That is the Ace of Swords. Swords, occasionally you'll hear them referred to as knives or something along that vibe. They are the most consistent, though, across all decks. Swords are swords. They tend to represent your mental outlook, intellect. You find them associated with the color yellow. And element-wise, if you tie in with elements, I do, they represent air. Now, remember what I told you in the original introduction. It has to fit for you. I've heard some of these suits be ascribed different meanings, different seasons of the year, and it just didn't feel right. Usually you'll find it with cups. I've heard cups described as being spring, and my brain just goes, no, not having it. Cups will never represent spring for me. Has to work for you. So please remember, this video is your starting point. Take notes. See if it fits for you. See if it works. So, with that in mind, for me, swords tend to represent spring. Ideas. They're your thinking cards. If a lot of them show up in somebody's reading, there's also a good chance they may be suffering from stress, anxiety, overthinking. Bear that in mind. Now, the Ace of Swords will look fairly similar in most decks. For those of you who watched the introduction and looked at Tarot del Fuego, this is what it looks like. A little bit grim looking, people grabbing onto the sword. There's blood, there's flame. You can understand why not everybody loves the deck and why I mentioned I don't actually read with it professionally. Tarot de Marseille, very traditional. There you go. Now nothing on it says Ace of Swords. They just kind of expect you to know. It is a great deck for reading with once you've got your keywords and you're used to what the decks mean to you, what the cards mean, the symbolism, the colors. When you've really found your feet, a deck like this is great to read with, but it's not great for beginners. But the imagery, nice, clear. Again, your signature colors, blue, red, yellow. Moving on. Wands. We could all make a few wand jokes there. We'll try to keep it clean. But in the Rider-Waite-Smith, that's what it looks like. A little bit of cloud, a little bit of scenery, but very, very basic. You'll sometimes hear wands referred to as rods, staffs, clubs. But you'll know where we're going. Something made of wood that can hit you with. So, just to give you an idea again, little variations. And yet when we come back to Tarot de Marseille, which incidentally calls them clubs, there you go. So, very, very similar, all kind of on a theme. For me, wands, if you think about the fact that they're wooden, you're thinking summer, growth, fire. Anything that we're talking about where there's character development, again, it ties in with growth. Fire, heat, red, anything that's talking about, again, I don't like to put in too much woo-woo, but if you're looking at magic, that little spark, again, we're talking wood, we're talking fire, we're talking wands. And wands tends to represent summer. So, cups. Cups, you don't get much variety. Occasionally they're called chalices, but here you go. Rider-Waite-Smith. Nice image. Ace of Cups. A lot of people associate the Ace of Cups and, interestingly enough, the Ace of Wands with babies. But that may vary, may not be that way for you. Ace of Cups in the Tarot del Fuego. Again, fairly provocative. Not everybody's cup of tea. And Tarot de Marseille. Very, very fancy cup there. And again, yellow and red and blue. Standard Tarot de Marseille color palette. Now, cups are very, very standard. It's probably the easiest one for most people to grasp because cups hold water. Water signifies emotion. It can also signify psychic ability or at least intuition. It's often used to talk about romance, love, friends, family, again because of its ties to emotion. A lot of expressions that involve water are to do with emotion, still waters run deep, that sort of thing. So they tie in very much with that. The color associated with cups and water, blue. It's not rocket science on that one. I have seen cups be declared as the spring card, and cups represent spring. It doesn't fit for me. Cups represent autumn for me. That stillness, the knowing. Autumn always feels like a more introspective season, which to me feels like it goes with cups. It's introspection, depth, feeling. And last but certainly not least, pentacles. You'll sometimes hear them described as coins, discs. And that's what the Ace of Pentacles looks like in a standard Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And there we go. And a little variation in our Tarot del Fuego. Weird and wonderful. And very classic Marseille deck. As you can see, it doesn't feel very pentacly. It's a little more sort of like a more floral disc. And most of them look like that in the Marseille deck. Pentacles, again, because they're coins, they tend to represent the earth elementally, and also our physical material things, our day-to-day actual, the minutiae of life, our stuff, how our doing and our being come together. Sometimes it's represented by the color green, sometimes white. I tend to go with white, but again, it's a personal thing. It's very much a personal thing, and it'll be what fits for you. Timing-wise, it tends to be winter. I tend to see Pentacles as winter. Here's why. I tend to come from a shamanic background. It's what my ancestry is, and I tend to interpret tarot through that lens. We all do it. Whatever your background is, whatever your cultural associations are, you will view tarot through that lens. You can't help but be influenced by your culture, your upbringing, your spiritual beliefs. So for me, when I see the wheel that tends to represent elements and seasons, starts off with yellow, air, thoughts, thinking, which tends to be represented by swords. Moves into the summer, fire, heat. You're looking more at knowing how your beliefs and values develop, because you've taken what you've learned, your intellect, and applied it to your life, and through growth you've developed as a person. That tends to be summery for me, and therefore red. Then we move across to the cups, autumn. Your intuition is kicked in because you now have a combination of knowing and thinking, and you have experience, and they come together in the cups. Your feeling, your intuitive knowing. It's also the more adult stage of your growth. The more, not necessarily wise, we don't necessarily tend to be wise, but we certainly are a little bit more experienced. And the feeling tends to be based on our experience and our intellect. The two come together, and we're able to apply them in a very balanced way. Then we move on to winter, Pentacles. The physical things, how we apply all those things. So you've gone from thinking, knowing, feeling, and then doing the top, applying those things into the physical world. And of course, again, so say if you look at them seasonally, spring, summer, autumn, winter. So for me, Pentacles represent winter, cups, autumn, wands, fiery hot summer, and swords tend to be spring. Again, that will vary person to person. You can use those for timing. Somebody says, what can I expect for the rest of the year? When will this happen? Well, if you've got a lot of cups, you can look at it and say, well, in all likelihood, you're looking at the autumn. If you have a lot of wands, you could say, well, the summer, probably the summer. Then you can also start looking at the numbers. 5 or less, early summer. 5 or more, late summer. You can actually use that number for timing if you want to. Some people really like to do that, to really hone down, okay, it's swords, so it's going to be spring. Are we talking, is it a 3 of swords? Is it going to be early spring? Is it a 9 of swords, later spring? And you can use that. You can also use the idea of passive and the idea of active. So if you've got more than one event, you can look at your active cards or suits. So wands and swords. They are active, aggressive. You could argue that they have phallic tendencies, all rushing in there, everything must be now. And then you have cups and pentacles. Still passive. More feminine attributes. When you think about cups and emotion and water, those are things more often associated with feminine. Pentacles might not seem quite so obvious, but when we talk about the earth, you often talk about Mother Nature, and we talk about earth goddesses and fertility goddesses and that kind of thing. So that ties us into earth. So cups and pentacles, passive suits, that tends to mean later, slow burn. It'll take time. When you're looking at wands and swords for your timing, sooner, active. Things will start to happen fast. So you can use that as a timing and a way to interpret your suits as well. So that's just another way that you can roll your suits into your readings as a whole to give them more depth and to allow you to look at things like timing. You can also, bear in mind, use the suits for their traditional meanings. You can look at wands and say, okay, somebody is looking at their growth, their self-development. If there's a lot of swords in somebody's reading, there's a lot of thought here, there's a lot of mental activity, and you need to be getting on with the doing. Again, stress and anxiety tends to show up with a lot of swords as well. So things like cups. We're talking about family, you're talking about emotions, your feelings, your heart, your personal life. That will usually be reflected with cups. Also, low moods and depression can show up in the cups. If somebody's got an awful lot of cups in their reading, you have to judge it based on the person you're reading for. Bear in mind, readings don't happen in a vacuum. You have another person and you can talk to them. It's not like you've got your head buried down here and you're not looking at the person. Quite often when I'm doing readings, I'll be saying to somebody, does this sound right to you? Does that sound like it fits? Does it fit with you? Does it ring a bell with you? Does it resonate? You know, that kind of thing. And people will tell you, and you will be able to tell the difference between somebody who has loads of cups in their reading because they are all about their personal life, they're a very emotional person, and somebody who is struggling with their emotions. So the cups will be your clue there. Your pentacles, the physical world. This is your material goods. You will often see this show up when somebody's talking about their job. They want to make more money, they want to invest. When they're talking about real physical, in the universe, knock on wood stuff, that's where you'll see a lot of pentacles come up. And these will help you interpret as well. If somebody's thinking about a new job and they're saying to you, how's this job going to pan out? Is it going to be the right job for me? Am I going to be happy? Or, as people often say, am I going to make more money? Is this going to be lucrative for me? If you start getting cups, you might have to say to them, look, this is going to be the most emotionally fulfilling job for you. Is it going to be lucrative? You're not going to be unhappy, so clearly it's going to pay bills, but it's not going to make you rich. But you're going to feel really good. You're going to feel positive and rewarded. If there's lots of wands to answer that question, maybe it's going to lead you into self-development. It's going to help you grow as a person. It's going to bring opportunities for you to develop your character and your experience. And while we're on the subject, because I have left swords out now, if the swords cropped up in that same question, well, this is going to allow you to develop with new ideas. This is going to lead you in new directions. This is going to change the way you think about the career you're in and the job that you're doing. See what I mean? Yes, the major arcana are great. They're the big hitters. They're going to tell you a lot of things. But these plain, boring little cards with their suits, and swords, and their cups, they're going to give you a lot of insight. They're going to give you depth. They're going to give you timing. They're going to give you characteristics. So don't neglect them. They're really important. Thanks for watching.